seconds to go. We need a Minneapolis miracle. Case on a deep drop, steps up in the pocket. He'll fire to the right side. Off by Diggs. Stay up. Oh my God! 30, 10, touchdown! Are you kidding me? Miracle finish! It's a Minneapolis miracle! Oh my God! No way! Ah! What a miracle finish!
And welcome into the State of Purple podcast Thursday preview edition as we head into week number 3 with the Minnesota Vikings, who are facing the Seattle Seahawks this week at home opener in Minnesota at US Bank Stadium. I am AJ Mansour and Jack Day is by my side. Jack, how's it going, man?
It's going. I think we talked about this on Tuesday's episode too, but it's a weird feeling going in this game where both, I don't know if your feelings have changed at all, but we both have a weird optimistic viewpoint on this game, which feels weird considering the Vikings are 0-2 to this point. But I'm looking forward to watching a game in front of a sold-out US Bank Stadium. Yeah,
it's going to be fun. It's going to feel good. We'll get to this a little later, Jack, but my optimism might have changed. We'll see. We can talk about it a little bit. But we have 3 episodes a week with the State of Purple podcast, and they are all recorded with interactive live video streams. So if you're listening to this podcast, thank you. Welcome to the podcast. We appreciate your subscription and your interest in Minnesota Vikings football. But we do record these live, and they run on all of our social media channels for KFAN, and you can partake in the conversation. If you're streaming this right now, throw your comments in the string, and we'll put them on the screen. We want to hear what you guys have to think and be a part of the show with us. So we'll be pulling those out throughout the show, Jack. But this weekend, again, Minnesota Vikings are winless on the season. Everybody knows that. We've talked a lot about that real quick. Seattle Seahawks have given this team problems in the past. I think people, like you said, are starting to feel a little bit more optimistic because of the way that the Vikings have played this last week against the Arizona Cardinals, the way that they're coming home for being in front of their crowd for the first time in a year and a half. Those things factor in to doing that. And then there's Russell Wilson, who factors against that. Russell has had great success against the Minnesota Vikings. Real quick, Jack, your thoughts on containing Russell Wilson? And if they don't contain him, can the Vikings win this game?
I don't think so. I think that's going to be one of the biggest key factors to this game, similar to how we talked about this a week ago with Kyler Murray. I don't think Russell Wilson is necessarily on that same athletic level of a Kyler Murray. But it just seems like not anymore, yes. Right. But it just seems he still has that factor where he can escape pressure fairly easily. And that just seems like I can just envision plays in my mind, whether it be the 2015 game where Blair Walsh missed that field goal. By the way, we're bringing up a negative special teams play. But I can just envision Russell Wilson kind of doing the same stuff that we saw that Kyler Murray did last weekend, where he's just running around in the pocket. He should have been sacked 2 or 3 times possibly, and then he finds someone downfield, and it kills the Vikings defense. And I think it's going to be interesting, similar to the 2020 matchup that we saw between these two teams last year. It's so different from what I was used to in that 2015, 2016, 2017 era, because back then it was the Legion of Boom and Mike Zimmer's hard-nosed defense. Both of those are completely gone. I don't think there's going to be a ton of defense played well, or there will be defense played, but I don't know if it's going to be played well in this game. And it's just I'm envisioning another shootout. And it's interesting. Our friend from Vikings territory, Dustin Baker, he tweeted something out this morning that said there are 2 quarterbacks in the NFL currently with 5+ passing touchdowns and 0 interceptions. Those 2 quarterbacks are Kirk Cousins and Russell Wilson. So it's going to be an interesting battle, more of an offensive battle than what we've seen in years past. And I'm looking forward to it. And I think it's going to be another shootout like we just saw in Arizona.
We'll go to our first question from the chat. ArcX11 on the Twitch stream wants to know, who is Jack Day?
It's a good question.
Actually, we had an answer from the chat as well. Jordo chimed in on the Twitch chat. Jack writes for KFAN. He helps us out at the radio station, also Vikings Wire, and a co-host of the State of Purple podcast. I'm just having a little fun, Jack. I don't know if you'll ever outlive that one from the
I don't think so.
Show, but hey, you're one of the family now that everyone's making fun of you. So
sure.
Welcome. Hey, Jack, the Vikings plan to win this game. What does that look like in your mind? What do they need to do if they're going to have a shot at winning?
I think we just mentioned one of the biggest key factors is if they're able to get pressure to Russell Wilson, they have to make sure they can get him to the ground and not let him create plays with his legs, because we've seen Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf, what they can do to opposing defenses. And if Russell Wilson has time in the pocket, or if he escapes and creates times with his legs, the Minnesota Vikings cornerbacks are going to get shredded. I think there's a play that lives in my memory rent-free from last season where I don't know if it was 4th and 10, 4th and 15. It was a 4th and long, and Cameron Dancer was running stride for stride with DK Metcalf, and DK Metcalf just kind of went up and took the football out of the air. And Cameron Dancer, if he would have turned his head and made a play, the game was over. The Vikings win, and we could have been talking about a playoff team in 2020. I know that's kind of interesting to talk about because that defense was so poor last year, and it was just a roller coaster ride throughout the entire season. But they could have been a playoff team if they would have won another game possibly. And that Seattle game is kind of one of those games that sticks out in my memory. And I think that's going to be the same thing this year. This is as close to a must-win football game in week 3 as you can possibly have. We were already saying last week in Arizona was as close to a must-win game in week 2. So I think that it's more important, more critical of a game in week 3 that they are able to contain Russell Wilson. And then flipping over to the offensive side of the ball, Derrick Henry just ran right down the throat of this Seattle defense. Their run defense is not there. I know Bobby Wagner is still playing at a fairly high level. I think I saw a stat that actually said Bobby Wagner and Eric Kendricks are on top of the league in terms of tackles. But I think this is a game where it's unfortunate that Dalvin Cook didn't practice yesterday. They talked about, or it seemed like Mike Zimmer and Dalvin Cook both in their press conferences, they didn't seem too worried. It seemed like they're still going to feed Dalvin Cook, and it sounds like if all systems are a go, he's going to play on Sunday. They're going to need to continue. Another play in that game last year was Alexander Mattison missing a hole where he could have scored a touchdown, and that can't happen. Dalvin Cook doesn't do that, so they're going to need Dalvin Cook to get going, and I think they need to continue to hopefully utilize play action a little bit more, because I think Kirk Cousins can find success against the Seattle defense. Like I said, it's going to be a shootout, so another huge key to this game is if they get the lead, they can't just coast and kind of like hand the ball, like keep your foot on the gas, because it's going to be a shootout. Seattle is going to put up points on this Minnesota Vikings defense, so they're going to have to continue to put points on the board. And I think the Vikings are going to have success on the offensive side of the ball, and I'm curious to see how that defense matches up with this star power at wide receiver and a future Hall of Fame quarterback in Russell Wilson.
Yeah, no, I mean, no doubt. You mentioned last week the Tennessee game. Tennessee was down by a decent number of points the first half, and they roared back to tie that game, send it to overtime, and ultimately win. And they did it on the back of Derrick Henry. Jack, I know I think we talked about this, and I know you know this, but they did most of that in the second half. Derrick Henry really wasn't doing much in the first half, and what they did was they shut down that explosive passing game of the Seattle Seahawks, which made them, the time of possession in that second half was very lopsided towards Tennessee. You take the ball away, you take those passes away from Seattle, you make them run. They're not a great running team. Chris Carson had 2 touchdowns last week, and I think he ended up with like 15 fantasy points, which means he had like 30 yards. So it wasn't like a whole lot of production on the ground. It was more of those explosive plays that we've seen a lot of this year already through, Tyler Lockett. DK Metcalf kind of had a quiet year, but leave it to the Minnesota Vikings to let DK get right. And that was the game last year. I believe that was the Cam Dantzler, what are you doing game, where, DK Metcalf was just doing whatever he wanted in that second half as Seattle roared back to end up winning that game. But the way that the Titans fought back is taking away that passing game. Don't have a lot of faith in the Minnesota Vikings defense right now to be able to do that, right? Patrick Peterson able to get some stops and able to do some things. Bashaud Breeland not necessarily able to do that. We're probably going to see more Cam Dantzler. In fact, Breeland is on the injury report with a back and a shoulder injury, was limited at practice on Wednesday. So we'll continue to follow that and see there. But I think that it might be Cam Dantzler just performance-based, whether there's an injury or not. So if they can take away or limit, let's say if they can limit that explosive passing game, you keep the Seattle Seahawks honest. You don't let them, get out and coast like you had mentioned either way. And then you run the ball right up the middle. Again, I have faith that this team has the ability to do that. The offensive line, they did it one week. They didn't do it the other week. Dalvin Cook is slightly injured. If he's not 100%, what is going to be limited? Is he going to have the power? Is he going to have the burst? Is he going to be on the football field? We're assuming, it sounds optimistic, we're assuming that he's going to be there. If he's not, it's a completely different game. The Seattle defense wasn't able to stop that run game. Their they weren't able to do a whole lot against the passing game either. But what they did is they got out of their game plan. So the Vikings need to get Seattle out of their game plan, make them uncomfortable for once. That might be getting out to a lead early. It might be establishing the run, right? That's going to be important. Like you mentioned, the questions around Dalvin, the ability to make that defense play honest for that play action really hinges on whether Dalvin can go out there early in that game and establish, and the Vikings can establish a run game. If they do that, then they know Dalvin's good enough to, or 100% or good enough to get out there and be dangerous. They also know that you have to pay attention to the play action, and they bite on those runs, which will then open up that passing game, which is the whole purpose of the play action there. So establishing those things is going to be very important. If they can't establish Dalvin, if Dalvin is not fully healthy or the run game just can't get going early on in this game, Jack, we saw a shootout this last weekend in Arizona. Do you think that the Vikings can win a shootout against Seattle?
I think they can, and it all falls on the shoulders of Kirk Cousins. I've mentioned this. You've mentioned this over the last 2 weeks. Kirk Cousins has played phenomenal football through the first 2 weeks of the season. We've seen, just going off the last 3 years and change now of Kirk Cousins being in Minnesota, there's times where he's kind of going up, and then all of a sudden he crashes, and he crashes fast, where he throws 3 interceptions or 4 interceptions, whatever it was last season to open up that. I think it was against Atlanta when he did that, but there's times where his game is just like, what is going on? This is not Kirk Cousins' style of football. I just mentioned that stat where it's just him and Russell Wilson with more than 5 touchdowns on the season and 0 interceptions. So Kirk Cousins needs to be able to play a very solid, sound game of football. There can't be turnovers. I know the interceptions usually aren't as big of an issue, but he can't be fumbling the ball either. I think there was almost a time when he fumbled in Arizona and they almost lost it because I think he was the one that ended up diving on top of it, but he has to limit all of those. They have to be able to kind of establish some sort of run game because that's how this offense kind of operates. But I think the Vikings have the star power. I saw another stat that blew my mind yesterday. I think it was Will Ragatz of Sports Illustrated tweeted out saying Kirk Cousins has completed 27 of 28 passes when throwing to KJ Osborne and Adam Thielen. The Vikings have a star power at wide receiver as well. I know we kind of were talking about Seattle and how good their passing offense is. The Vikings passing offense is just as good as Seattle's. I think Kirk Cousins has to come out and sling it around if they want a chance to win in this game. I think that's going to have to kind of be clicking on all phases. They're going to have Justin Jefferson hauling in those hard catches. I know that was another thing circulating Twitter where the ball that Kirk delivered probably should have been caught on that left sideline in the end of the fourth quarter when they were driving. But those plays are going to have to be made if they want to stay in this game because I'm fully expecting another shootout. And I agree with you. I don't think either of these defenses are going to be able to keep up with either of the offenses.
Yeah, I mean, it very much has the potential to be a shootout. And if the Vikings are in that, they've proven now that whether it's a 2-minute drive or whether they're just going back and forth, they can compete in those games. Jack, if you had to choose one thing on the offensive side of the ball and one thing on the defensive side of the ball that the Vikings have to do to stay in this game and ultimately win this game, where would you put that?
I think on defense, and I'm going to sound kind of like a broken record here because I think it is that important. They have to get pressure on Russell Wilson and make him uncomfortable. But not only do they have to do that, they have to make sure they're bringing him to the ground. Like I said earlier, it just seems like every single time these two teams play, they're able to get the pressure to Russell Wilson. They're just not able to get him on the ground. And he is able to kill this defense with his legs. If he can extend plays, I don't trust these cornerbacks being able to stick up with the high-powered speed that they have in DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. They have to be able to get Russell Wilson on the ground on the defensive side of the ball. I'm not overly concerned, kind of similar to what you were saying. I'm not concerned that Chris Carson is going to run it down the throat of this defense. I think they're going to be able to contain him, and it all just falls on the shoulder of being able to stop Russell Wilson. And then switching over to the offensive side of the ball, I think this is going to be a Dalvin Cook game, in my opinion. It was a shootout last week, and I think Dalvin Cook still finished with like 130 plus rushing yards, and that was after he came off the field a couple times. They're going to have to continue to feed Dalvin Cook, get that run game going, and hopefully that can allow for them to open up that play action a little bit more. I know that fans and myself included were a little disappointed that they didn't utilize that as frequently as they usually do in Arizona, especially with how well the run game was going. That's where Kirk Cousins is at his best. I think they did it like 9 times in Arizona, and he was like 8 for 9 with like 120 yards and a touchdown or something off play action. So they need to get that run game going. That's still going to be the focal point of this offense because that's how Mike Zimmer wants this offense to run. But if they get down early, they're going to have to be okay with opening it up and letting Kirk Cousins run this offense and keep slinging the ball around, because he's playing at such a high level right now. Until he has one of those blow-up games, you have to put 100% faith in Kirk Cousins right now and let him run the offense and let him keep slinging it downfield to these playmakers that have been doing this for the last 2 seasons. And now you have a new playmaker kind of exploding onto the scene in KJ Osborne. So you have to be able to, or you have to be willing to utilize all of that firepower that you have on your offense. And whether that means the run game gets bottled up and you have to start throwing it, you have to be able to kind of adapt. And that's something that I feel like the Vikings haven't been great at doing in the last year and 2 games now. And if the run game gets bottled up, they're going to have to utilize the arm of Kirk Cousins and let him continue to play at a high level.
We have a comment from the chat real quick. I'll pull it up. Chris Wright says that Patrick Peterson has been playing terrible so far. I know last week he was one of Pro Football Focus's lowest 5 graded Vikings. I can't remember exactly where he fell on that list, but he was bad and struggled in a comeback game against his former team, the Arizona Cardinals. The first week, I feel like we didn't see a whole lot of Patrick because they were going against Bashaud Breeland. They were focusing on the other side of the football field. That might mean that he was doing good. It might mean that he has garnered respect in this league, and they just knew not to go that way or thought not to go that way. What's your initial assessment, I guess, on Patrick Peterson so far this season?
I'm still not concerned, and I think this is a game where they need to really utilize not only his talent, but kind of pick his brain a little bit. This defense, I mean, Patrick Peterson has gone up against, I think I saw it was like 18 times he's gone up against Seattle in his career, and he's seen these players. I know he probably hadn't seen DK Metcalf for probably only a season or 2 when he was in Arizona, but he's used to playing Russell Wilson. He had a press conference today, and he was kind of just talking about the respect that he has for Russell Wilson. He put him in the same tier as the Tom Brady's, the Peyton Mannings. He put him in the same tier as those guys, and he said he has all the respect in the world for him. He needs to come out and perform better. This defense is going to find success, though. I don't think I'm ready to say. I mean, Patrick Peterson is not the biggest worrisome, especially even just the cornerback position. I think I saw Bashaud Breeland, out of qualifying cornerbacks. I think there's 110 of them. He ranks 110th in PFF's rankings, which is atrocious. And I think similar to what you were saying at the top of the show, they're going to have to utilize Cameron Dancer a little bit more. If Bashaud Breeland continues to struggle, I think he is kind of that spot where I'm the most worried about on this defense right now. It just seems like Patrick Peterson, he has the experience. I think he's going to get things turned around. Mike Zimmer throughout training camp was saying he is by far the best cornerback we have on this roster. I still have faith in that, although we're still kind of yet waiting to see that. But I think it's going to help this defense. Like I said, I still think it's going to be a shootout, but the crowd noise and just the atmosphere at US Bank Stadium is really going to help this defense, in my opinion. I think they're going to be able to do enough to at least let the offense get out in front and hopefully win a close football game.
They should be able to do that. I know one other interesting stat I saw on those cornerbacks. I believe that all of the how do I properly phrase this? I think, let's say the top 3 cornerbacks, so Patrick Peterson, Bashaud Breeland, and Mackenzie Alexander, were all in the bottom 20 of those Pro Football Focus grades across the league for cornerbacks. So the 3 cornerbacks that we have are all within the bottom 20 rankings so far through 2 games. Not great. Definitely not what you want to bring to the table when you have a passing game with DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett in the mix. The other thing that we're worrying about, Jack, and we're focusing in on is that injury report. We've talked about Dalvin Cook, how he did not practice on Wednesday. Anybody who's ever had a sprained ankle of any kind, any degree, understands that sometimes even if you're able to go back into the game, the next couple days are when that thing tightens up, when it swells up, when there's a bruise. So it's sensitive to the touch, it's sensitive to movement, it's sensitive to bending, all those things. It is one of those situations that sometimes it gets worse before it gets better. So it's possible that he wasn't able to practice on Wednesday. It's also possible that they were just resting him out of an abundance of caution. They don't need him in practice. They need him in those meeting rooms. They need him doing therapy so that he can for sure be on the field. He's a veteran player. He knows this offense, might not need to be out there every single time. So scheme for Seattle, but also rest that ankle. The other concerns on that injury report, Jack, Well, let's go with the positive first, okay? Anthony Barr, limited with a knee injury, limited for the first time that we've seen during the regular season at practice. Christian Darrisaw, also limited. And then it gets a little extensive. Everson Griffin, concussion, he was limited. That'll be a big problem, or a big situation to get him back to put that pressure on Russell Wilson like you're talking about. Eric Kendricks, this one was interesting. He's listed with a hip injury this time, limited in practice. Last week it was a quad. He made the ability to play the game and was healthy enough and played pretty well. This week it's a hip injury. Patrick Peterson, like we just mentioned, a toe injury. If that's turf toe's tough. And we've seen a lot of players miss extended periods of time for turf toe, but all it's listed as is just a toe. And then Bashad Breeland with a back shoulder, also limited. So some players that are limited. Will be very interested to see today's injury report, which kind of stinks because it doesn't come out till like 7 p.m. because the Seahawks, I think it was 8 last night, even local time here, because the Seahawks practiced late on the West Coast. So that injury report comes in. We'll see Thursday's injury report and then the Friday injury report, and we'll be paying attention to where those players that were limited end up moving, whether they're back in practice or whether they're still limited or if they're downgraded. And then we'll obviously be watching Dalvin Cook. From there, Jack, let's close it out with this question. Vikings are 0-2. We've heard all the statistics about 0-2 teams in the playoffs and the division and all these things. On a scale of 1 to 10, as best you can, how important is winning this game against the Seattle Seahawks this weekend for the rest of the season?
I think it's pretty high. I'd say somewhere between an 8 and a 9, honestly, because if they start 0-3, I think we've had all these stats that we've talked about starting 0-2. Like you've said in previous shows, that is with a 16-game season for the most part when 6 teams from the NFC make the playoffs. This year, 17 games, 7 teams make the playoffs. If you start 0-3, I think it's going to the stats obviously are going to show that it's going to be near impossible to get back and claw your way into the playoffs.
0-3 might be the new 0-2 for all those statistics.
Yes, that's a good way to put it. That's kind of what I was trying to say. So it's very important, and it's a game where you see all the other stats where Russell Wilson, I think, is 7-0 against the Vikings in his tenure with Seattle. It's not going to be an easy game to win, but I'm hopeful and optimistic because, like I said, this game is at home, and this is like a team that hasn't seen their fan base in a year and 8 months, a year and 9 months, whatever it is. They know the importance of this game. I think a lot of these guys on the injury report are going to do everything in their power to go. I think getting a guy like Anthony Barr back is absolutely huge for this defense, especially in the run game. They've been missing his presence quite a bit, honestly. So I think it's a very important game. I don't think it's quite a 10 because, like I said, it is a 17-game season. Teams can turn things around. But if you start 0-3 and then Cleveland comes in, if Cleveland's able to pull off a win this coming weekend and they come in 2-1 and they're kind of starting to turn their season around after starting 0-1, we get back into that conversation about potentially being 0-4. And if this team starts 0-4, I have no faith in them even sniffing the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, I would put it at a 10, I think, for this week. I think that the situation next week is more dire, and it's going to be a more dangerous game that I think Kevin Stefanski is going to come back to Minnesota looking to prove his old coach wrong. Not wrong. I guess he took a different opportunity, but he's looking to prove that his offense is going to be better than Mike Zimmer's defense. It's old school versus new school that you're trying to prove. It's turning the page on a team that has been down in the dumps forever, made the playoffs last year, but that they're the real deal. That's what they're trying to prove. And I'm scared of next week more than I am this week. So if they drop this week, morale drops. We hear all those negative things. We continue to talk about the coach's future. And then Kevin Stefanski and the Cleveland Browns come to town. That is like worst case scenario. Clearly it's worst case scenario, but I'm more scared of that situation. So I do put it at about a 10 for this week. And I kind of stumbled into it, but PR in the YouTube chat also mentioned and asked, is it Mike Zimmer playing for his job? Jack, there was a report, I believe it was Jason LaConfora, who had come out earlier this week saying that there are sources close to the situation that are saying that the Wilf ownership group is hinging the future of Mike Zimmer on making the playoffs this season. Not finishing 500, but making the playoffs this season. I think that if that report has any accuracy or any validity to it, does tell us that Mike Zimmer's playing for his job each and every week as we go here, because digging yourself an 0-2 hole is not the kind of thing that you want to do if you have to make the playoffs to save your job.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, this game is, we both said, very important for this team. If they start 0-3, it's going to be that much harder to get in the playoffs. So I'm not ready to necessarily say that, hey, if Mike Zimmer loses this game, or even if he starts 0-4, he's out the door. But the more, it's going to start to get a lot more tense if the Vikings continue to lose football games. And I think that's fair. I think Mike Zimmer knew going into this season that his job was on the line if he can't make some sort of run into the playoffs. And I think that's why he went out and attempted to rebuild his entire defense. And he got all these free agents. I mean, I don't think they really signed anyone on the offensive side of the ball in terms of free agents. They tried to rebuild the defense, and so far, it doesn't look like it's working. So he's going to have to get things figured out. That defense is going to have to continue to gel together. And if that defense continues to let up 30-plus points a week, it's going to be a struggle. I think the offense can hang in there with teams and put up 30 points as well, but it's not easy week in and week out being Kirk Cousins, Justin Jefferson, Dalvin Cook, knowing, hey, we're going to have to get 30-plus points just to be in this football game, especially when your head coach is a defensive-minded head coach.
I'm pulling this completely out of thin air, so making these numbers up, and I'm surprising you with this, Jack. But let's end with a little back and forth over under kind of a situation. I'll give you a scenario. You tell me if you think it'll finish over or under. Danielle Hunter 1.5 sacks this weekend.
If the Vikings want to win this football game, I think it has to be over. We saw him play very well against Arizona. He's heating up at a good time because this defense desperately needs him to play at kind of what he was 2 seasons ago. He's already at 4 sacks on the season. I'm going to go over on that. I think that's a tough task, but the Vikings desperately need a good game out of him if they want a chance at winning.
Kirk Cousins, 2.5 touchdown passes.
2.5. That's tough.
That's the whole point.
I'm gonna say under on that. I think Kirk's gonna have a good game, but I think it's gonna be more of a rushing attack. That's really hard because he has 5 on the season, so that's right in the middle. But yeah, I'll say under. I think this is gonna need to be a Dalvin Cook game, like I said earlier. And I think if they get down there, they're gonna try to punch it into the end zone and kind of expose that front 7 against Seattle and rush it in.
Okay, we'll make this one a little easier then. Dalvin Cook over under 100 yards.
I'll say over for that.
Over under. Okay, and we'll end on this one. Rashad Hill over under 3 holding penalties.
I'll say
we can close on that one.
That's something we didn't even bring up though. Also positive news. I don't think he's ready for Seattle quite yet. But I read somewhere today or yesterday that it sounds like Christian Darrisaw is going to kind of start ramping up with team activities and team practices, not just individual drills, which is huge because I think everyone in that building knows that he is the missing piece of that offensive line. And if they want to continue to kind of ascend and become a good yet young offensive line, he is the missing piece. Rashad Hill, I'm happy he's on the Vikings roster as a backup swing tackle, but he's not a true left tackle at this level. And we need to see what Christian Darrisaw can bring to this offense.
I'm going to take the liberty of making a correction on your behalf. You said that everyone in that organization knows that he's the missing piece.
Thinks.
Hopes.
That he's the missing better piece. Word, yes.
Because if he's not, then we're back at square one. And
yes.
We've wasted another draft pick, and we just proven once again that Rick Spielman doesn't know how to pick offensive linemen. That's worst case scenario.
Yes.
Jack, we'll wrap it up. Again, we'll be back Sunday evening because this is a late afternoon game, about 10 minutes after the game wraps up, to give you our first initial reaction opinions on whichever way that game goes and ends up with the Minnesota Vikings winning or the Minnesota Vikings losing. We'll have the raw emotion that we will bring to the table 10 minutes after the game, and then next Tuesday again with a full recap once we have had our opportunity to be a little bit more level-headed. Jack, you have a great weekend, man. Enjoy the game, and we'll talk Sunday evening. See you later.
10 seconds to go. We need a Minneapolis miracle. Case on a deep drop. Steps up in the pocket. He'll fire to the right side. Off by Diggs.